Hello there, this is Oli from another side and welcome to the final episode of Errors of the Chernobyl series. The episode begins with director Bryukhanov telling Dyatlov that the experiment has been postponed since it is the end of the month and all power plants need capacity to carry out the plan for the nearby factories. Although there were so-called plans, that is how much your factory should produce, this is not true. They received the instruction from Kiev not to lower power supply simply because there was an evening energy consumption increase. You know, people watching TV, washing, cooking and so on. There's a thing that is quite irritating to me, and that is when some characters are acting like baboons trying to find out who the alpha male is. And not only in this series, but in 80% of all films lately. I understand that a conflict is the basis of any theatrical plot, but inserting it everywhere does not help, especially if you are trying to show a true story. Dyatlov had the reputation of a tough and a serious man, but all people who surrounded him and gave interviews point out that he always acted like a professional. The way Dyatlov behaves in the episode is implausible. He couldn't threaten his subordinates with losing the job simply because there was no unemployment in the USSR, no matter how strange it may sound, and professionals were always needed. By the way, this is partly the reason why people drank so much. It was difficult to punish them. To lose a job in their field or any field permanently, it was called a wolf ticket. You had to break the rules systematically. And by the way, again, this is one of the reasons why Soviet products were not of the highest quality except for military products. This is because all military products were checked by designated officers before being accepted, while other factories, those which did not produce anything for the military, would be checked by their own commissions, which, of course, affected the quality of the products. That is why in the later USSR there was a joke. The thing does not fit in your butthole and doesn't whistle. What is it? A Soviet butthole whistle. On the contrary, Soviet military products were of the highest quality and very cheap at the same time. Now, let us talk about the test at the nuclear power plant. The test was that they wanted to check what could be done if the power plant stopped producing electricity, in particular supplying water pumps with energy. For such cases, there are diesel generators, but launching them takes about a minute. They wanted to check whether it was possible to continue receiving electricity from the turbine because it could spin for another minute. Prior to this, such tests had been carried out, but they did not end in success and the turbines had been modernized for another test. For the test, it was necessary to reduce the power and they reduced it to critical values on the previous day. According to the instructions, if the reactor comes to low levels of energy production, then there is a stage called iodine pit. That is when there is a lot of iodine-135, which transforms into xenon-135. These two elements take a few hours to fall apart and they reduce the reactor's power capabilities. So the reactor cannot be started for another 2 or 3 days. Dyatlov still launched the reactor. The reactor didn't increase its power due to the iodine pit. So Dyatlov began to take out the control rods. These are the rods that must be present between the pieces of nuclear fuel. There are a total of 240 control rods in the reactor. To decrease the number of rods to less than 30, you had to have the permission of the chief engineer. But you cannot have anyone's permission to make the number of rods be less than 15, and Dyatlov left 6 rods. He set the reactor to a capacity of 200 megawatts, that is 10% of the reactor's capacity, and this was unexplored territory because they didn't usually run the reactor at this level of power. The RBMK reactor is a boiling reactor. The water boils in the chamber and then the steam goes to the turbine. And at 200 megawatts, the boiling point was at the very top of the water reservoir. But keep in mind that boiling point is density transition point. With the decrease in the turbine operation power, the water supply power decreased. There's a thing called void reactivity effect. When water boils, it sharply reduces its density because water turns into steam, and steam cannot serve as an additional layer of protection between the nuclear fuel pieces. So This increased the power of the reaction. After that, there was a sharp increase in power. Nuclear fuel pieces scattered, becoming small grains, so there was the first thermal explosion. Particles of 250 microns entered the water. This caused the second explosion, the steam explosion, which actually destroyed the energy block number 4 of the power plant. Having had analyzed the debris, they calculated the explosion to be around 10 tons of TNT. So Dyatlov, Bryukhanov and Fomin made two mistakes. First, they should have waited for the iodine pin to end. Second, Dyatlov took out safety rods, leaving only 6 while there should have been at least 15. But even with all that, the disaster could have been avoided if there had not been a design error. In order to save boron carbide, they had put it only in the middle part of the safety rods. So when they pushed the emergency button, safety or control rods went down and pushed out water, which had been slowing the reactor down while being transparent for neutrons themselves, thus accelerating the reaction even more instead of stopping it. So the accident became the result of 3 errors occurring simultaneously. Now back to the episode. Legasov is forced to lie to IAEA Commission. He promises to do so, but on the condition that modernization begins immediately. In reality, the modernization began to be carried out straight away after finding out the reasons. They were working on it for 6 years. In addition, believe it or not, the IAEA does not consist of idiots, and they would have figured out the slightest lie very quickly, so there was no point in lying. Another fact is that, again, believe it or not, Soviet officials were not idiots either. They didn't have to be threatened with truth in order to fix their own power plants. An example of RBMK's reliability is the earthquake in Armenian town of Spitag. Back then, Armenia was the part of the USSR. The city was destroyed to the ground. 25,000 people died in an hour. By the way, Boris Yevdokimovich Sherbina was dealing with the consequences of this disaster as well. So next to the city there is a nuclear power plant of the same design, but it withstood an earthquake of 6.5 points and continued to provide surrounding cities with electricity. I must point out that the sensor readings in the operator room are shown well, but this is not surprising since all indications are available. They are not a secret. Again, this is because the USSR decided not to make a secret of this accident. A year after the explosion, during the trial of the leaders of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, Dyatlov was the only one who did not try to shift the responsibility for the explosion to others. The chief engineer Nikolai Fomin, for example, called Dyatlov and one of the engineers guilty without hesitation. Dyatlov admitted that he could not restore the reactor energy supply after a sudden drop in power. However, according to him, the main cause of the accident is the imperfection of the reactor itself. Dyatlov is guilty, but he did not know about the possible consequences of the violation simply because no one knew about them. It should be noted that explanations in court are very understandable and truthful, although they are shown as for primary school students. Another important detail was that Sherbina could not order the court. This was impossible in the USSR, or at least for the simple fact that he was never in the courtroom. And of course, Legasov's testimony in Vienna was not a lie. To this day, no one has denied them. And this is the moment that makes me angry, because the Vienna report is actually the moment of his triumph, the triumph of truth for which he fought. The initial IAEA report first was classified, it was top secret, but Legasov and his colleagues managed to change the status to for official use so that more people could see it. The first response from the party's defense committee was to involve representatives from the KGB and the foreign ministry in writing another report and to prosecute those who wrote the initial report. But then the Prime Minister Ryzhkov made the final decision. He read the report and declared that the initial report was the only right approach, because in situations like this you cannot tell lies. So the initial report written by Legasov and his colleagues was released. Thus, the creators slandered the struggle for truth that Legasov waged. But they didn't stop there. The episode tells us that Legasov hindered the promotion of the Jews. I do not know where they got this information from, and I really doubt it. At least because the top leader of the entire nuclear industry, Yefim Pavlovich Slavsky, the Minister of Nuclear Industry, was a Jew. Legasov's death did not cause the modernization of RBMKs as shown in the film. The modernization began immediately. Ulyana Khamyuk is not the image of scientists. This is the image of Svetlana Alexievich, who wrote the book the series is based on, and her books are full of lies, at least according to people from whom Alexievich took interviews. Besides, I didn't find a single mention of the arrests of scientists who worked with Legasov. It's just another lie. Dyatlov, Bryukhanov and Fomin were not convicted to hard labor. They were allowed to serve their sentences in the colony of settlement. The colony of settlement is so much strict you can live with your family there. These are completely different things, and once again it reflects misunderstanding of Soviet reality by their creators. The bridge of death is a myth. The only proof I could find was by a man saying that I've heard it from one guy when I was in hospital. So why are there so many inaccuracies in the series? First of all, due to the fact that Mazin relied on the work of Alexievich. Another reason is his historical consultant, Yelena Kozlova-Pets, who has been living in the United States in North Carolina for more than 20 years. Her husband is an amateur screenwriter. He knows Craig Mazin. And that is how Yelena was hired for the job. For such things, it is better to find real consultants and specialists and not your friends and acquaintances. Why did the series become so much popular? I connect the unexpected success of the series with a intentionally raised hype from HBO, which urgently needed to recover from the absolute failure of the end of the Game of Thrones series, which at first was a huge success. Despite the fact that there are so many inaccuracies and lies in the series, personally I am grateful to the creators, at least for the fact that I read in more detail about people who work there. I was impressed by the story of Sherbina and many others who sacrificed their health and even lives in Chernobyl. Well, this is it for the Chernobyl series. If you have any questions, please write them in the comment section below. I will try my best to answer them. See you next time. Bye.